Welcome back to another episode, and in today's video our buildables are no longer going to be with materials. They're going to be gray, and we're going to need to interact with them to finish those off. And once we do, the collisions come on and everything is fine. So this obviously works for all of them. It works for our windows and doors as well. So we should be good with that as well. There we go. Boom. So let's get started. So first, in this video, we're going to need a material that I created in the first episode, which is just the gray color material. It's the same material that we use for all the other ones. It's just that this one simply is gray. Now, so once we have done that, let's go ahead and we're going to have to do some adjustments, some adding to do inside of all of our buildables. So let's pop all of them open. And let's see. So first, what we need to do is we need to store in the memory what kind of a material this object is actually using. So let's go ahead and let's create ourselves a new variable. Let's call this materials. Let's make this into a material type. So material. Let's make this into an array since, well, our models might be using multiple different materials. So once we have done this, let's make sure to go to our event graph, and on begin play, let's get our materials, or actually let's set our materials rather. Then let's grab our static mesh component and let's get materials with an S, materials. And it's going to give us all the materials that this object has. So this one is a material interface object reference. So this one does not work. So we need the material interface. Let's recreate that into that type. There we go. It gives us an error since it's empty, but once we set it, should be just fine. There we go. Now to save time, what you can do is copy these three nodes, go to the next one, and then the graph, begin play, just paste that in. And make sure to right click the materials variable and create a variable out of that. There we go. Otherwise, if you don't do that, if you don't create a variable out of it, it's going to give you an error. So just right click, create variable materials. Here we go. Let's do the same thing for the rest of them as well. So we need the event begin play on this guy. We don't have one over here. Let's make sure we do. And that one is added. Create a material. Good. And now the last one, the window one, I'm using two meshes for this, and those are completely different meshes. So if we do this, this is not exactly going to work because, well, we are not using the static mesh component. We're using another different component that we have. So what I'm going to do actually is, instead of using this static mesh base component, I'm going to use one of these. Since both of those use the same materials, it is just fine and it's going to work great. So we have done that. Now every single one of our buildables know what kind of materials they should be running. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that our material is getting set to the gray one. Now the next thing, of course, we could have done this already before and then copied all the thing over, but I'm going to do this separately, so basically I can explain every single step that I'm doing. So now we are storing the default original material in the memory, so the blueprint is going to know which was the original material that will need to be placed on later. But now we need to replace this with the gray one, so that whenever we build something, so that the build would be transparent essentially. So in the event graph, what I'm going to do is here we get all of our materials. So I'm going to do a loop for each. I'm going to go through all of the materials. And what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to grab our static mesh component. And from that, I'm going to set material. We're going to set the material like this on loop body. Element index is the arrays index. And then we want to make sure that we set this to be the gray color. There we go. So now let's just copy these last few nodes to all of our buildables, like so. Connect the array. Technically, I think we can use any array. It shouldn't really matter which one we use, but we're going to do it this way. We're going to connect it to the original one. Technically, the other one should be doing the same thing because now both of them technically should be the same thing, essentially. So now the difference is going to be for the last one, for the build window. And the difference for that is going to be the fact that, again, we're not using the static mesh component. We are using just the static mesh, so the child component. So let's go ahead and let's plug that in. Now also what we want to do is we want to use the static mesh 1 as well. And I think we should be able to connect both of those like so. And it will change the material for both of them. So just set both of those as a target and everything should be fine. So now let's give this a try. As you can see, the build is now gray. So we can still build everything on it, we can still walk on it, but we're going to disable being able to walk on it in a second. We're not going to be able to walk on this no longer. I'm just making sure that this actually does work. Here we go. So this everything should be still working and functioning at this point, because they all still have their default collisions. It's just that the visual is a little bit different now. So one small thing, maybe if you are seeing the same thing as I am with the windows, that one of them, so basically the windows are a little bit separate, different. So what I'm gonna do is with the glass material, if you have like this, that it's just a one-sided mesh, then it's gonna give you some small issues. So just make sure that you set this to be two-sided. Save that. So your glass is two-sided material, because this happens when there's like a plane, and essentially in reality you can see through the plane from one side and you can't see through it from the other side. So that's essentially what is happening. We are able to see through that material, through that mesh essentially. It was annoying me quite a bit. So now both of them are the same. Good. So that seems to function well. Now the next thing that we need to do is we got to make sure that our objects actually require some kind of resources. So I don't have the inventory system with this project right now, but later on we're going to bring in the free inventory system, and we're going to basically build on top of that. Obviously you will be able to use any inventory system that you might have. I'm going to explain what and when I'm doing, and you just simply need to use your functions instead of maybe mine. So let's go ahead and let's open up our as buildables so we can provide the resources. So at this point, since I don't have any inventory, I'm going to call this resources, and I'm going to make this into an integer instead of being a item, because later this is going to be an array of items. So now the next thing is our buildables database. We need to provide the amount. So I'm going to say that all of my builds are going to take 3 interactions to be finished. So I'm going to do it like this. I could have set the default value, but I'm going to change this variable later, and just in case I don't want to mess this up, since structures do tend to break a little bit. So 3 interactions and the build is going to be completed. Now the next step would be to let's start off by, let's disable collision later. Let's start off by actually being able to interact and finish this build. So for that, what we need to do is inside of our build interface, we need to add a new function. And I'm going to call this set build cost. So this essentially is going to inform the blueprint how much it actually costs to be finished. So again, I'm going to call this resources, and let's make this into an integer again, since that's what I'm going to pass along. So now that we have done that, what we got to make sure of is that inside of our buildables, we run this. So event set build cost. And we promote that to a variable, and I'm going to call this cost instead of resources. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to again copy this into all of my blueprints like so. Right click, create a variable, right click, create a variable, create a variable. So I could have used a master, but yeah, I thought that I might have quite a few issues with the masters, since yeah, later we might have all kinds of different buildables. So I basically will have to copy and paste this like so, unfortunately, but it is what it is. Anyway, so we have done this. Now we got to make sure that we can actually interact and set something up. So for this, what we actually need to do is we got to make sure and check whether the build is already finished or not. So let's start off with our, let's work with just the floor now. Let's forget about the rest for now. So for the floor, let's go ahead, let's add ourselves again another variable, and let's call this is build finished. And another variable would be resources placed. So is build finished is going to be true or false. Resources placed in my situation again is going to be the integer, but for the later on it's going to be the actual items themselves. So this is all good. So what we want to do next is we have the interaction event. which is the interact with build, which we use to open and close the doors. So what I'm going to do is run that over here as well in the floor. So we have the event interact with build. And the first thing that I want to check for is, let's do an if, and let's check whether the build is already finished. So let's go ahead and let's check that. Good. Now that we have done that, if it's going to say no, if it's false, well, then the build is not yet finished. So what I'm going to do over here is a very basic +1. And yeah, that's basically it. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the resources placed. I'm going to get those, and I'm going to do a ++ increment integer, and it's going to do a +1 and set it. So it's going to set it over here. The next thing is I want to check whether the build cost is equal to the resources placed. So I'm going to check if both of those are equal, and then we're going to do an if to check if that is true. And if that is true, then we're going to set our build finished to be true. And whenever our build is finished, well, then we want to reset our materials back. So what I'm actually going to do is grab our static mesh component, and also I'm going to grab the materials. And from the materials, I'm going to do a loop for each to go through all of the materials that we stored on the begin play. And I'm going to reset those back for our static mesh component. So from the static mesh component, my tongue, we're going to set the material and connect this, connect the index so it knows which index it should replace, and the array element goes into the material because, well, all of the array elements are storing those materials in the memory. And now the last thing to do is actually, well, before we can test this, because this part is all good, we have finished with this one, but we got to make sure that we set the build cost itself as well. So how do we do that is by going to our build component and providing this info. So we have our build component, and what we need to look for is where we actually build something. We have the spawn build function, this one right here. We have the interface functions that sets the material, and also we want to set the build cost as well. So build cost message. Again, the same target, the actor that we just spawned. So let's use that one. And also we need to provide the resources. So plug that into from the buildables database. So some small little bit of a rerouting to make it a little bit neater. And now we should be able to test that. So obviously it's going to work just with the floor. So let's place a couple of floors down. And now let's interact with this. So 1, 2, 3. There we go. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. There we go. So that seems to work. Let's go ahead and let's apply the same logic for all the other ones as well. So I'm going to copy this interact with build. Let's go to the door. And as you can see, well, with the door, we already have that function. So actually what I'm going to do is, just to be safe, let's do all the other ones first, and then let's go to the doors and the windows. So we have the foundation, so we can paste that in. All good. Let's promote these two variables. Is build finished, resources placed, and we are good to go. Now we need the wall. We do the same thing for the wall. Paste that in. Let's promote these to some variables. There we go. Good to go. So now we are left with the window and the door. So instead of copying the whole thing, I'm going to copy everything except for the interact with build. So I'm going to copy this bit, go to the doors, and over here we're going to need to do some tiny bit of adjustments. So I'm going to move this out. Let's move this up here maybe. Paste the bottom piece like so. And again, promote these two variables. Good. We're ready to go. So the first thing on event interact would be checking if the build is finished. Now, if the build is not finished, well, then we run our building code, which will reduce the resources and finish the build for us. But if it is finished, well, then we can do the previous interaction. We can open or close our door or window, whatever that we might have. So I'm just going to copy this once more because it's already aligned the way I need to. Go to the build window and do the same thing. Move all of these nodes out, copy these ones in, place them in, promote is build finished, and promote resources placed to a variable. There we go. There we go, there we go. Connect this. And we are good to go. So now all of them should work. So let's give it a test. Let's place down some objects. Make sure to test all of them just in case. Here we go. So now at this point, again, like I said, the windows should still be working and the doors. Oh, yeah, obviously they're not gonna work. Windows did work. That's interesting. So I messed up something with the windows. So that's good, that's good. That's not good at all. That's not good at all. So let's fix the issues that I've made. So obviously on the build wall, whenever we begin play, we are running this mesh right here. So on begin play, this is the mesh that we have, the default one, but we are changing it afterwards. So instead of in the build wall or whatever other buildables that you might have that have this set mesh, instead of running this code on begin play, we need to make sure that we run this after we have changed the mesh so that it would grab the new materials that it might have. So that's a mistake on my part. So now that one should be good. If we move it up here, go through all of your buildables if you have any extra ones, just to make sure if you have that event in other ones as well, and then replace the things from the begin play to set static mesh. So I don't have anything else, so this is good. And now that our wall is good to go, let's fix our window as well. What I made a mistake over here, I was just copy and pasting the same code, but over here we need to do something a little bit different, because for our window, again, we're not using the static mesh component. So instead, let's grab our other two components that we do use, and let's plug those in as the targets for the set material. Again, you can plug both of those in into the same target, and it's going to change the material for both of those. So now, let's make sure that it works now. So I'm gonna maybe build this a little bit bigger just in case. There we go. Let's give it its final test. Let's double check some of these things. It's usually better to test out multiple instances of the same thing. So 1, 2, 3, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So I'm just gonna spam E now to make sure it is good. There we go. So that's good. There we go. So this seems to be just fine. Now the next thing that we need to fix, the last issue, is so that we can walk through this, because right now, well, we are getting blocked and we can't walk through that, but we do want to be able to walk through that. So now for that, let's work with our build floor again. Let's start with that one. So we have on begin play, we have a loop that changes the materials, and after it has been completed, what I'm going to do is from the static mesh component, I'm going to set collision, oh my god, set collision response to all channels. And what I'm going to do for all of those channels is I'm going to ignore all of those channels, except for I want to change one channel for the static mesh component. Again, I'm going to set collision response to a specific channel, just to channel. And for that one channel, which I'm going to use the visibility channel, because that's going to be the channel that I'm going to be interacting with. You can see that if we go to our third person character, here we go, E key event, line trace, interact with build is using the visibility trace channel. So on build floor for the visibility trace channel, I'm going to make sure to block that instead. So now I'm going to build it over here. We should be able to walk through that, but we should also be able to finish that. There we go. But as you can see, we can still walk through that. Now we can still stack the builds next to it. We can finish those as well, but obviously, as you can see, there is no collision. So let's go ahead and let's reset the collision as well. So what I'm going to do is down below where we reset the materials, again, we have the materials loop, and after it has been completed on set static mesh component, what I'm going to do is again set collision response to all channels, and I'm going to block all channels because that's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to block all channels. You can see that by selecting the base component, scrolling down and seeing that the default collision preset, this one I checked just for testing, that's by default it should have been off, I believe. Yeah, there we go. So you can see that the collision preset is set to block all. So now, whoops, wrong key. So we can walk through that, and if we finish, we can no longer walk through that. So that's good. That's exactly what we want. So again, copy the same nodes to the same places. So we have this one, connect the targets, same values for the door, same values for this guy as well. I know I could have technically done this for all of them at the same time, copied all of them at the same time, but this is a tutorial. You're supposed to learn, and we are supposed to go through this step by step so that you understand what am I doing instead of just copying and pasting the code all the time. Now again, for the window, it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to use these guys as the targets. Again, we can plug in both of those at the same time, so it's going to work just fine. Now the last bit is setting the collision back to block all. So again, same place, same location, same code, same idea. So let's go ahead real quick, let's do that. Shouldn't be too long, and we are pretty much done with the video. So yeah, I'm gonna finish this off, and I just want to say thank you to everybody who has watched this series. We have gone quite a long way already. Probably at this point, well, these videos are not yet public and they're basically not available yet, but probably by the time you are watching this video, you will be sending me quite a few suggestions and requests about some future episodes, and yeah, I'll probably gonna be making those soon. So